Hi everyone, my name is Christina Brown and my son is Graham. He's 3 years old and I have a little boy named Hudson who is 1.5 and my husband Brandon. We are high school sweethearts and so we are a family of 4. And Graham, who we're here to talk about today, is just a bundle of joy. He is the sweetest little boy. He is full of life, personality, and he lights up any room that you hear him. He lights up any room that he comes into. He is, if you were to say joy, Graham is who I would think about because he's just so happy all the time and he just loves everybody. So Graham has a very rare genetic condition called Cri-du-Chat or 5P-. That's the easier thing to say, is 5P-. And 5P- is caused by a deletion on the short arm of his 5th chromosome. So that is the P arm of the chromosome, which is why it's called 5P-, because it is a micro deletion. And 5P- is spontaneous for 90% of cases. There is 10% where it could be genetically carried, but his is spontaneous. So at conception, his 5th chromosome did not fully develop, and so there is a missing piece, a break at the short arm of the chromosome. And 5P- causes intellectual and physical challenges. So Graham, he doesn't walk yet, and he is nonverbal, but we're working on all of that through his therapies. He also has feeding difficulties, so he's been in feeding therapy since he was 4 months old. So he's been attending feeding therapy and physical therapy, and he also gets occupational therapy and speech therapy. 5P- is also a spectrum disorder. So one kid with 5P- may look different than another kid with 5P-. It just depends on the size of the break on the chromosome and what therapies and early interventions and just who the child is in itself. So it looks very different across the board. It could be very debilitating or it could be very mild. So kind of like autism, it's a spectrum disorder. So Graham was diagnosed with 5P- on October 7th, 2016. He was almost 7 months old. After he was born, nothing at the hospital was unusual. The pregnancy was all normal. There were no concerns or anything like that. As the months went on, he was not meeting milestones and he wasn't developing appropriately. And so I kind of noticed, hey, what's going on? He wasn't smiling, like socially smiling. Our pediatrician was just like, oh, kids develop at different rates. Like, he'll catch up, basically, was the story of the next 6 months. He'll catch up, he's fine, he'll catch up. So we actually went to a gastroenterologist who in the appointment was like, oh, he's got an unusual cry. And so Cri-du-Chat, it stands for cry of the cat because they have a cat-like cry at birth. And so, I was kind of like, well, what does that mean? But didn't think too much of it. Anyway, so he referred us to a feeding therapist just to help Graham, learn to eat, and he didn't nurse very well and things like that. So we went to the feeding therapist, who then referred us to a physical therapist because she called him a floppy baby, which means he had very low muscle tone. So he wasn't holding his head up, he wasn't, like I said, meeting milestones. So that kind of progressed us into our pediatrician finally was like, okay, well, we probably need to go see a neurologist and get an MRI. Which was very scary. So we got, went to see the neurologist and she was like, oh yeah, I don't really think like too much is wrong, but let's get an MRI just to see. So we did the MRI and it came back. The pediatrician was like, yeah, everything is good, like there's nothing really concerning. He called us back about 10 minutes later after he had talked to the neurologist. And the neurologist said, actually, Graham's brain is smaller than children of the same age. And that day I kind of lost it because up until then it was like you're dealing with all these emotions. I was dealing with postpartum anxiety and depression just due to me knowing that something wasn't right. And everybody telling me, oh, he's going to catch up, and he didn't catch up. So finally, the MRI came back and then the neurologist was like, well, that doesn't mean that he has a disability. Like, it could just be that his brain is developing slower than everybody else's. So the doctor wanted to do genetic testing, and they did a urine sample to check for like different proteins, to check, I don't even remember all that they checked, but I took him to the doctor and they drew blood and they did a urine sample, and Graham is just screaming and crying. And of course, I'm crying, and so all of that, and then the waiting game continues. And so October 7th, 2016, I had gotten home from work, and we get a call from the pediatrician, and at this point we had designated that my husband would be the one receiving all the medical calls because I was just so fragile at that point. And so he comes back in and he says, well, we have an answer, and he starts to get emotional, and he said Graham has something called Cri du Chat. And so the emotional impact of the diagnosis was awful. Just to be really honest with you guys, it was really awful. It was the worst day of my life, because you have all of these expectations for your child, and then with one phone call and one word, everything just kind of goes out the window. And so you've got this diagnosis that you know nothing about. Our pediatrician didn't know anything about it. He's like, oh, well, you can go to this website and look it up. And we're like, what does that mean? So that night I actually took off. I took off running because I'm a runner, and that was all I needed to do. So I ran out of the house. And it just kind of went downhill from there that evening. I remember it was Hurricane Matthew was coming through. So I actually headed down the street we have a playground in our neighborhood. So I went down there and I hid on the tire swing because I didn't know where to go or what to do. Because I wanted to be with my family, but I also wanted to be away from my family. And so that's where I landed. And my dad came and got me and eventually got me into the car. So without going into much more detail, that was kind of the night that we got his diagnosis and just the emotional impact. The best way I can describe it to you guys is it was like a piece of pottery, and it was cracked up, the months up until that, and then right at that moment, that phone call, it just shattered. It's the best way that I know to even describe it because it's not really describable. Shattered would be the way that I would call it. So that was kind of the final breaking point for me emotionally and for our family. So you've got an answer, and so now you've got to navigate forward. So thinking about the stages of grief. So I'm actually a counselor too, so kind of learned about all this as well. But thinking about the stages of grief, it didn't go in the order that it's spelled out for us. But it is definitely a grieving process because, like I said earlier, you're grieving the child that you had planned for, the child that you had always prayed for. These things, when you get pregnant, you're so excited to have all these things with your kiddo, and you get to do sports, and you're gonna do. He's gonna go to college, and he's gonna get married, and all that. And that in that moment on October 7th, all of that disappeared. So it definitely was a grieving stage, and up until that point, I think I was grieving along the way too. I remember bargaining was a big thing for me because at nighttime was hard for me. I would just pray and pray and pray, and I'd be like, God, maybe he just has a mild form of cerebral palsy, And I was like, okay, maybe that's what it is. It's just a mild form, kids can walk and do all those things, and can I just have that? Can I have that? Which is awful because you're asking for your child to have cerebral palsy, which is not easy either. So I said, can you just give me that? Or can you give me a mild form of autism? Something that we can deal with. And so I remember bargaining these weird bargaining things with God, and I would say, just please, I'll do this or I'll do that if you just make it better. And so I would pray, and it didn't get better. And so I think definitely that kind of with the bargaining piece was early on. And so later on, once we received the diagnosis, I was never really in denial. I think I'm not going to speak for him, but Brandon maybe would say he went through the denial piece, and some of my other family members, but I don't feel like I was ever in denial because I was one of the people that knew something was going on. But the shock factor was awful on diagnosis day. Like I said, it just shattered me, and so I was like, what just happened to me? I've never experienced anything like this, these feelings I've never experienced. And so shock definitely took over, and I would say it took over for maybe a couple of days. before I went back to work that Monday. And anger, definitely. I still deal with anger every now and then. As you guys know, the grief process never just ends. It's kind of fluid and it comes and goes. And so anger, I was really angry at God because that's a big part of our family's faith. And so I was really, really mad at God because through my pregnancy, I don't know why I was prompted to pray this, but I would pray every night for his chromosomes, and I would pray that nothing would happen and that he would be, normal and typical and all those things. And God gave me the exact opposite of what I had prayed for. So I was really mad. I was really, really mad that I had to deal with this, and that I was like, I didn't deserve it. I do everything right, all those things. So anger, definitely. And then I remember one point, I think it was like a week or so after his diagnosis, we were at the neurologist for a follow-up for his MRI. And I just remember walking out the elevator with Brandon and Graham, and I remember just something hit me, and it was like, there's purpose in this, and like you have this as something that's going to be a calling. And so I think that was kind of acceptance at that point. And like I said, these feelings don't just go away. Like, we kind of cycle through them all the time. So like I said earlier, the grief never goes away. When you have a child with special needs, things just randomly will remind you that your child is not typical, and it kind of takes you back to the grief process. One of the hardest things is for me is birthdays, and birthday parties are really hard because when I was pregnant, a lot of my friends were pregnant, so they've got these kids, and we go to their birthday parties, and they're really great at including Graham and our family. But when we go, it's really difficult for me personally because you see the difference, and you see that your child is not typical, and so all of those feelings hit you again. And so that was really hard. And his birthdays are kind of hard for me too. I love birthdays, I love celebrating, and I love celebrating him, but birthdays are hard because, again, you're seeing that the gap is getting bigger. Like, when people talk about their kids, or they complain about their kids, or they like say, oh, I took my kid to college today and it was so hard, like that was the hardest thing ever. And I'm like, I would do anything to have my child go to college. Again, that bargaining piece. I would do anything to have him go to college, and you're complaining about it, or and so those things are really hard. I do have hard days. I would say 90% of days are awesome and great, and our family is wonderful. But then there are harder days that just kind of hit you out of nowhere. I could be having a great week, and then just something will just spark it just like that, and I'll get really upset, or the grief will just hit me, and I'll kind of shrink back into that feeling. And so I think like having healthy coping skills is really important, and having a support system in place is the most important thing for parents with children with special needs, because you can't do this alone. And just like any time you're grieving, you can't do it alone, and you shouldn't do it. So your support system is really important when you are grieving, or you have a life event that kind of is unexpected, or you're dealing with something hard. And so I can honestly say that the best thing that has come out of diagnosis has been our support system. We have an incredible family. So both of our parents are super involved. Graham doesn't sleep very well, and which is part of Cri du Chat. And so actually my parents basically moved in with us after diagnosis, or before diagnosis even, to help us at night with him. So they gave up basically everything to move in with us. And Brandon's mom comes and stays with Graham. They pick him up from school. They take him to school because we both work. And I can't put him on a bus. And he doesn't go to our neighborhood school because he has to go to EC class at a different school. Anyway, so the support system has been incredible. We have amazing friends. We have people that I work with, people at church. We have people that have really just stepped up, and they never left my side, because throughout, before diagnosis, I didn't want to talk to people. I kind of closed myself in. I shut off, and people would text me. Even if I didn't text them back, they would text me. They would call me. They would come and drop off gift baskets. And so we've had a support system that has been, I don't even know a word strong enough, because they're so incredible. And I think that has really helped us to cope, because when we're feeling down, or like if I'm at work and I'm having a really hard day, I can go and I can ugly cry in my friend's office, and she just will just close her blinds and shut her door, and she's like, you just do what you need to do and I'm here for you. So we have friends that have dropped everything for us when we need them, and it's just been incredible to witness the amount of people that love us and that come out and support us. And so leaning on those people has been my coping mechanism, because I didn't know what else to do. And so when I'm down, they'll pick me up. And you need that. You need that as special needs parents, because being a special needs parent can be very isolating, just because your child is not typical, and so you're not like doing the play dates and things like that, the typical kind of life with little kids. Even though we do involve Graham in all of those things, and our friends are very accepting of him and including him, which is wonderful. And I think one of the other cool things that I'll talk about too with our support system is that their kids have learned to include Graham. And so that's a very good learning lesson for our friends' kids. So lots of cool things have come out of it, lots of awesome things. And one of the coolest things that came out of it was we've created a community group called Graham's Gang. And Graham's Gang is basically just our support system, but we do big events. We raise money for the 5P- Society. We have awesome events. So we hold a 5K every year. And the first year, I think there were it was over 100 people that came out. The second year it was, I think, 180 people that signed up. And then last year it was like 150 or 130. Graham's Gang has been a passion project for me. It's allowed me to kind of pour my energy into something positive, to come out of all of the negative feelings that I had surrounding his diagnosis and just this new normal that we live. And so it's been a really big passion project, and I just hear people tell me all the time, like, Graham's story touches me so much, or it helps me to lead a more positive life, or he inspires me so much because he breaks every expectation we give him. If we set a goal for him at school or therapy, like, he meets it. We were told like he would never walk or talk, and he's working on standing, and he took a couple independent steps this summer, and so he just crushes every goal that we set for him. And so he's so inspiring to me as his mom, but also to our community. And that was one of my hopes for Graham, which you hope that your children are good people, but I hope that he inspires people, and I hope that our story can impact somebody else. So something else that came along with Credo Shaw was that piece that I talked about earlier, where it could have been a genetic carrier piece, and so we had to do all this genetic testing and things, because we obviously, we wanted more kids. We didn't just want to have one child. That was always just something that we had talked about. So we did all this genetic testing because we didn't know if we were carriers, and so thankfully we are not carriers, and his was spontaneous, and so that allowed us to move forward to trying to have another child. And so on May 22nd of 2018, Hudson joined our family, and Hudson is 1.5 now, and he's a little ball of personality. And Hudson is typical as far as we know right now. He doesn't have any genetic conditions or things like that, and so it's been really, really neat to watch Hudson and Graham interact. If Graham's upset, well, Hudson will go over and like rub his head, or just pat him, or he'll pick up his favorite toy and just take it to Graham because he knows that's Graham's toy and Graham needs that toy. And so just seeing that compassion develop in him has been amazing, because siblings of children with special needs, they deal with a lot, and so they don't have the typical bond that siblings have, and they're kind of forced into this role of a caretaker. And later down the road, when we're no longer around, like, that role will pass on to our other children. And so we just hope to develop this bond between the two of them, and for Hudson to have a sense of compassion for all people, not just people with special needs, but that the situation that he's in can kind of lead to that with all people. They have a sweet bond. They they really, you know, Graham wants to do things that Hudson does, and Hudson wants to do things that Graham does, and so I think it's really pushed Graham to kind of learn new things as well. Like I've noticed that Graham's speech is coming along a little bit more. He's making more sounds and he's talking, and I think I really do attribute that to his relationship with Hudson and seeing Hudson develop. So it's been cool to watch, you know, and just balancing the two different kids, and so it's been sweet just to see that, and to see our family dynamic change, and to add another member to Graham's gang. Graham, can you say hi? We're gonna talk to other people. So this is Graham, and like I said, Graham is 3. He's the sweetest little boy, but we just, you know, we have very big hopes for Graham. We don't know what he's going to be able to do. We kind of leave that up to him because, like I said, all kids are different. So we kind of leave that up to him to show us what he can do, because we know he has so much potential. So we just continue to have therapy for him, continue to build him up, continue to just support him. And my biggest hope for Graham, is that he just inspires people. That his story teaches inclusion, that his story teaches positivity, that his story teaches that every small victory is worth celebrating, because you never know what little victory is going to come to a bigger victory. And so we just celebrate everything with him. I hope he knows that he's loved, and that lots and lots and lots of people love him, and that he's just treasured. And he's a sweet little boy, and that just our story would make an impact in some way, you know, through the grieving process, through the celebrations, through Graham's gang, through everything. So that's our hope for him, and we know that he's gonna knock it out of the water, and he's off to play. But you know, just that he would make an impact.